Okay, so today we're reflecting on our inquiry projects with our Year 10s, and maybe Allan, you could start us off on telling us about the collaboration that was in your class, any learning partnerships that developed?
The learning partnerships, the students first chose their own groups. I restricted the size to 2 or 3 students in a group, and once learning was taking place, if another group came to me with a similar problem, I'd refer them to a group that had already solved that problem. We were on the way to solving it. So there was cross-learning within the groups as well.
Cool. I think for my class, the students weren't used to thinking about going outside of the classroom for partners, learning partners, but they did get quite excited. I had one student whose dad was a plasterer, and he was like, oh, I could ask my dad how to work this out, and so that was cool for his project. And another, one of the boys, he was thinking about doing a hangi project where you dig a hole and cook food underground, and he was going to use that for his volume project and knew someone who could put down a really good hangi, so he was going to do that. And also a couple of students from my class and Brigitte's class are planning a visit to a chocolate factory to have questions to a chocolatier as to how they produce the moulds of chocolates and some of this, how the production of the chocolates takes place and things that they need to note when they're designing their chocolates. So that's quite exciting for them. What about things that were unplanned, or what didn't you expect when this project? Maybe Brigitte?
Well, I found that the kids didn't know about realistic measures. They had one of the groups designed a doghouse which was 5 meters long. All the heights of houses and roofs were quite enormous structures.
Did you find that, Allan, as well?
Yes. Especially when it came to volume and density. One group, they were creating a garden statue. If they stuck with the original measurements, it was going to be over 30 tonne in weight if they made it out of concrete. But one of the things for me that came out was one group got a proper understanding of the difference between volume and surface area. They created a birdhouse which they had initially hadn't thought about the fact that it needs to be hollow. They had a solid object. So that led into great learning about this is the difference between surface area and volume.
Right. Yeah, they really had to come to grips with what does volume mean. I had some students that struggled with that too when they had an oval kind of fountain or bird bath shape, and they were trying to, now is the volume inside, or they couldn't quite grasp how to work that out, and it took a lot of thinking for them. It was really good.
I was going to say, I've got a group that sort of decided that they were going to make a garden sculpture out of concrete, but didn't want to make it hollow, and then it ended up quite heavy.
Yeah.
And then they just changed the dimensions, and it became a paperweight instead of a because that was not as heavy as the garden sculpture would have been.
That's good. So anything else that you observed in the students while they were working that came out?
To me, the best thing was they started with the problem and then looked for the solution, which is quite the opposite how I've been teaching mathematics for many years, is where we give them a bunch of skills and then set them problems to go off to use those skills. It made the skills more relevant. And I think the sticky learning was occurring because once, especially where they repeated a shape within their sculpture, once they had it once, they could then go on and keep repeating those skills.
Yes.
I think the discussions between the students were quite, important, and it was good to see how they were talking to each other and saying, "Oh no, this is how you've got to do it." And when the shapes changed, things like the triangle, how the area was different, they needed to work out the height of the triangular prism.
Yes.
And how do I do this? And and then we could bring in some other parts as well. And we've worked with Pythagoras again to work out lengths and distances and heights and other kind of measures we needed.
A little bit of side learning that went on is I encouraged them to make their objects out of different materials, and some of them didn't realise that depends on what you make it out of will determine the weight of the overall weight of your object.
Right.
It's just learning I assume they had, but they didn't have.
Yeah. And coming to grips with density, what that means actually to determine the weight. Yeah. What's one other thing? Oh, I think, students surprised me in by choosing the objects themselves, they actually ended up with much more difficult volumes than I would have normally given them in class as exercises. I would have probably, some of those shapes I might have given as extension work to the students who I knew could find those, work them out. But for the majority of the students, they had to work with quite difficult, hexagonal pyramids and things like that. But, they all managed to work it out, and I think they all learned a lot more than what they normally would have.
I agree.
Yeah. Any improvements you can think of that you'd do for next time?
I think I might have spent more time on researching sort of 3D shapes before they decide what to make. Some of them just sort of jumped right into the deep end and kind of came up with something where if we kind of went in and had a look more at spheres and ellipses and what kind of measures do they need before they can calculate the volume or the surface area, that they kind of just had a wider idea of what's out there, and also sort of brainstorming ideas in terms of what to make and what to do, what are the different things out there.
Right.
I think that we might have had a wider variety of things that were created and they investigated and designed. If we sort of spend a little bit more time initially in brainstorming ideas and shapes.
Yes, I thought that too. I later came across an activity you can do, like 100 ideas in 10 minutes, and then you take of all those ideas, if they had just give them 10 minutes to really brainstorm, and then find the darling idea, find the there'd be a lot more to work with, I think, a bit more creative. And the other thing I thought of, I used to collect their A3 sheets after every class and just have them in a box, but I think I will blue tack them up to the wall and have a learning wall so they can actually see what all the different groups are working on.
That's a good idea.
It would be quite cool, rather than just putting them all into a box at the end of the lesson, each lesson. If they put them up on the wall, they can be proud of what they've done each lesson.
So for me, I would like to have more examples, if we went back to the garden sculpture again, more examples of garden sculptures, and lend them more towards mathematical modelling, where it may not necessarily be a mathematical shape, but it's closest to the shape, so we can model off that, which is bringing maths into the real world, or the real world back to mathematics again.
Well, that's cool. Thank you. We'll stop there.